Huge thank you to CIBC for making We Get It possible. Good evening, everyone. Karine, Program Director with Young Adult Cancer Canada. Welcome to a new episode of We Get It. Every Monday night, 7 p.m. Eastern, we come live on Facebook and we talk to a bunch of awesome people. We, meaning me and all of my imaginary friends, apparently tonight. We have chats and conversations, and tonight I am once again with two wonderful people that we've known for a long time at YACC, Nicole and Chris, that we love. And we're about to have a pretty neat conversation this evening, because it is evening, not always evening when I record these, but full on evening in Newfoundland. I'm wearing my hair up tonight. I have a little black hoodie and lights are on, which sometimes I kind of like in my own office, which is a bedroom, but nobody ever sleeps in here. So it's become a home office, and I kind of like the feel of it in the evening, and some paintings and frames surrounding me, which I kind of like. So that is me tonight. And like I said, I am with Nicole and Chris. I've known Nicole since 2011. That's the first time I met you, and I met Chris a few years later. And since then, they have both, in their own ways and together, been integral parts of YACC. Thank you both so much for being with me tonight. How are you doing?
Thanks for having us. We're good.
Doing good.
Doing good. From Toronto, at home right now. Thank you for coming on the show. So tonight together, we're going to talk about, so we'll hear a little bit about Nicole's story. So Nicole was diagnosed with cancer. She'll share a little bit about that, and Chris as well. Chris is her husband. So they'll be able to share a little bit about that. But ultimately, what we will want to talk about together is going to be about family planning, and more specifically, when it comes to Nicole and Chris, adoption. So, family planning for people watching, either you are a survivor yourself, a young adult survivor, a supporter, parent, or someone who's just interested in learning about the experience of young adults. Family planning is quite different for everyone. Fertility can be affected when you get treatment of cancer as a young adult. So that's one factor, but family planning is much broader than simply just fertility related issues. And then comes choices that people have to make about what they want, what makes sense, what is possible, what is not possible. And in Nicole and Chris's case, adoption is what they have. It's the dream they've been working on for a while. So we're going to talk about that with them tonight. Thank you for agreeing to do this with me. I've missed you both a lot, and I'm really happy to be able to see your faces all cute, squished together on one screen, which is awesome. Thank you and welcome. First, let's start about maybe a little description. Who are you? What do you look like? Where are you at?
Okay, we are Chris and Nicole. We are coming to you from our very small dining room in our townhome in Toronto. We are from Newfoundland, but we're in Toronto right now. So I, Nicole, am sitting next to Chris. He's on my right. And I have my hair put up. I have normally blonde hair, but the pandemic has brought me back to my brown roots because I haven't been able to get my hair done in a very long time. And I'm wearing my clear glasses and some dangly earrings and a beige sweater. Behind us, you'll see framed pictures of our two homes, St. John's and Toronto.
So
I'm Chris. So 31 years old. I work in sports marketing. I'm sitting here, obviously, like Nicole said, side by side with my round, jovial face and my COVID flow that is getting a little bit too long at this point.
I know it is a COVID flow. I haven't seen Chris and Nicole in a long time. Like Nicole, a little less time than Chris. Chris, your hair and beard, everything. I love this COVID look on you. I think it looks great. I like it.
Throwing it out.
Yeah, that's it. Rocking it out. Might as well. We're stuck in that. So, hey, thank you both. So, let's start, I guess, Nicole, how about we start just by learning a little bit about you and your connection to cancer, a little bit about your cancer kind of story. And then Chris, you can jump in whenever you kind of came along.
Sure. So, like Chris, I'm 31 years old now. I was first diagnosed with cancer just before my 20th birthday. And I was diagnosed with a rare type of sarcoma, or bone and soft tissue cancer. And it was located at the base of my skull. So really involving brainstem and muscle and bone in a very precarious area. Living in Newfoundland at the time, and just had turned 20 by the time I was going into receiving treatment. And because it was such a rare cancer and requiring really people who treat this type of cancer on a regular basis, which, because it's so rare, wasn't in Newfoundland. Left Newfoundland to come to Toronto for surgery, and then Boston for radiation. For afterwards, went back to school, became a social worker. Shortly after, or I guess in the midst of that, was connected to YACC. And I've really been connected to YACC in multiple different ways.
All the ways.
All the ways. So literally all the ways, yeah. So as a participant, the first program was Retreat Yourself East in 2011. And then I did, I guess the role was peer.
Yeah, you did that. You volunteered for the Shave as well. Yeah, came back as a peer conference.
We started Bruise Bowls and Charity Goals together, and then we were local life volunteers here. So
yes.
A lot of connections.
So and then at one point I was working for YACC. So all the different connections. In 2014, Chris and I met. At that point, I was, I would say, living a relatively normal life, whatever that means. But I was working for YACC at the time, I think. Yeah. And, not going to treatment, definitely still processing some things, but, living my everyday life. And where am I going with this?
Well, I guess it's just like the trajectory. So I'm following you because I know your story, but for a long stretch of time, you were kind of trucking along, slowly getting into living your life, as you know.
Okay, I'm back on track now. Okay, so Chris and I met in 2014, and at that point, I was living my normal life, whatever that means. Together, we decided it made sense for us to move to Toronto in 2016 for our career aspirations at that time. Again, at that point, I was healthy, still being monitored very closely, given the nature of my my cancer. It was something that I knew I would always probably have to do some sort of follow-up on, and always knew in the back of my mind that recurrence was an unlikely probability. But still felt it was very important for me to try to live my life, which is challenging for sure when you're trying to balance those two things. So in 2016, we moved to Toronto, and we've been here since. We got married in 2018, and
3 weeks before the wedding.
I'm getting there. So we got married in September 2018, but just before we got married, I had my regular MRI that I was kind of just going through the motions of, this is something I do, but I'm not worried about. Yeah. And it had taken me a long time to get to that point of where I wasn't anxious before my MRI. I didn't have that skin anxiety. A long time to get to that point. Almost, that 10 or 9 years. So I was really at a point of just going through the motions. And, just sitting at home alone and logged onto my patient portal to check my results and read the results and then read it again. And Chris came home. He had been, I think, he was playing a team sport. And I said, I think this is saying that I have recurrence. And it almost didn't make sense to me because I just wasn't, I was feeling great, was not there. Like, it was not something I was expecting. And we were so busy planning our wedding. So this is April, and we were getting married in September. So it took both of us reading it and then kind of spiraling into, anxiety and kind of catastrophizing and emailing my specialist three or four times, like, why haven't you reached out to me?
Yeah.
And he hadn't even seen the results yet. It was just, okay. I had to log on to the portal before he even saw the results. So here we were, preparing to go back to Newfoundland, get married in a few months. And I was so focused on that I was like, nothing is standing in my way. Like, I don't know if it was denial or I don't know, but I was like, I don't care. We're getting married. Like,
yeah. Whatever it was, it's like, yeah, sister, I'm glad you were able to get into that zone.
The fortune, our friends were coming from all over the country, all over the world, actually. And I was like, I don't have to wait. Like, looking back, it was just like, okay.
Okay. But that's kind of how I've seen you be more than once. So part of me is like, well, it's going to have to wait. I'm getting married, Kenza. Fuck you.
I mean, maybe it was a little bit of denial, but also my personality too. Anyway, we did get married on time. And then 2 weeks after our wedding, I had my first immunotherapy treatment. So I was really lucky that, compared to 10 years ago when I was first diagnosed, there's no treatment available for me. This wouldn't have been an option 10 years ago or even 2 years ago. And it may not have been an option if I was still living in Newfoundland or somewhere else in the world.
Right.
She's the first female in North America to be put on that immunotherapy.
The first one, really?
With this particular diagnosis.
Yeah, with chordoma.
Yeah.
On this particular drug. So it was a bit of a whirlwind and a lot to process. I had just gotten to a point of, planning for a future, planning for my future, which I had struggled with a lot, and I still struggle with. And I think we'll talk more about that. But planning, we have been planning this wedding for 2 years. And for me, planning anything that far in advance, I don't even like to plan what we're having for supper. Whereas Chris is the ultimate planner, and I love that, but it's not me. So I was just getting to a place where I felt comfortable planning, and then to have the rug kind of ripped out from under my feet, our feet. It was complicated.
I imagine. Chris, like, how was, give us your impressions of that.
No, it was just it was a whirlwind, honestly. It was it all just happened so fast, and here we were, living our lives in Toronto, and things were moving along. We had life plans all figured out, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh well, you have recurrence. So the first thing I do, obviously, is think about every single possible path, which is what I do. But I do remember finding out about the immunotherapy treatment, and naturally I'm a little bit more optimistic than Nicole is. So I was just like, yep, sign her up. Here we go. We're ready. Like, this is going to work. Everything will be great. And she's like, they don't nobody even knows anything about this. And there's a lot of hesitation, but I talked her into it. And and it was, it's been obviously extremely effective for managing her treatment. So it was, it was, just thinking about every single possible outcome is normally the way I look at things. And okay, if this is the path and this is the path. So took a lot out of me to assess every possible which way this could go. But in the end, it all worked out.
Yeah, because you met, like Nicole was saying, you met her after her initial cancer diagnosis at a time where things, to your point, were kind of like, well, this is it. We go from one test. But for you, Chris, it was kind of, you hadn't had really to go through any cancer planning, treatment, whatever. So you jumped in with both feet.
Yeah, I think, my first experience was coming up because she flies up once a year or twice a year for just checkups and updates. And so I came up probably after we had been dating for a year, maybe something like that, and came up to Toronto, but I still didn't really comprehend it. To me, that was just like, we just had a party weekend and she had to spend 3 hours at the hospital. And like, that was, that was it. I was like, great. We had to go see a Jays game and go hang out in Toronto, and we'll go to the hospital for 3 hours, but that's worth it. But so it didn't really click in, honestly. Like, I didn't think anything of it until she had a recurrence. And then that's really when I was just like, whoa, it's we really got to make some life-altering decisions here.
Yeah, so you've both adjusted after a lot. And so Chris, you just said, like, ultimately this happened, you went into planning mode. Nicole, you had access to immunotherapy, which actually worked quite well for you this time. So I know that you've been in treatment for quite a while now, which is finished at this time.
Yeah.
Yay.
And,
and so as you're going, both of you are going through this, I imagine that it's not yesterday that you started to talk about the family planning parts of your life and where this was going. And so can you tell us a little bit about how this came about and how you came to thinking adoption was going to be the right choice for you?
Yeah. We had always talked about adoption. Adoption has touched both of our lives, so it wasn't a foreign concept. But I had always questioned, if fertility would be an issue for me, given everything my body has been. We did, so prior to starting the immunotherapy, we were referred to a fertility specialist. One of them, we're really privileged. We met with one of the best fertility clinics in Canada. And, they laid out all our options for us. And we were really set, or at least I was, I think, probably more so than Chris, on we're going to do either egg or embryo freezing.
Yeah.
And we left the clinic that day with a blood requisition to go have that, start that process, because the first step was to have blood work done. And, like everything else, it was kind of a whirlwind. We were, I think, just caught up in, taking off a list of what needed to happen before we started treatment. And, thinking, just remember, like, we had come back from our wedding and then had this small time frame of starting treatment.
Yeah.
So we left the fertility preservation clinic, or the fertility clinic, had the blood requisition in hand, and the blood lab is just basically around the corner. And so we enter the hospital where that offers the blood lab, and we're in the lobby there, and Kristen's like, "Are you sure that you actually want to do this?" And I said, "I don't know." And he said, it doesn't really feel right for me. And I said, "I think you're right. Like, it doesn't feel right for me." So we went home and thought about it for another day or two, because we didn't have much time. Mm-hmm. And then we emailed them and said, "Actually, we're not going to do it." And I know probably, a lot of people listening to this are like thinking like, why not just do it? For me, all I can say is, for me, and my own health and my own mental health at the time, it wasn't right. And Chris didn't feel strongly one way or the other. And we had always talked about adoption. So it wasn't the right path for us.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, I think it's just you've just mentioned, like, there's a few things that are pretty interesting in that, but you've mentioned something super important, Nicole. And I think for anyone listening, yes, I think for some it's like, oh my God, that would never have been me. And that's okay. And I think for others who have felt really bad or guilty or something, kind of as if they should have, where ultimately though, sometimes we make the best decision at a time where it's like, well, if I look at where I'm at, how this feels inside of me, my mental health, what this just does not feel right. And I think it's hard. Those decisions are hard to make. But I think ultimately it's hard, but I feel you both are pretty good at that. But sometimes once those decisions are made, it's try to not let everyone else's opinion come into the decisions you made, regardless of what that decision is, which is really hard because people always have something to say about everything. But ultimately, this was yours to make. This was you thinking and dreaming your family together and figuring out at this specific time what made sense. And, thank you for sharing that piece. It's important. A lot of people talk about that.
Yeah, and I think we definitely felt all of those feelings, the guilt of being privileged enough to have access to one of the top fertility clinics that were basically saying, you're eligible for, X, Y, and Z at, a discounted cost, and then to not take advantage of that. Yes, we wrestled with those feelings. And I think we're both people that don't live with regret. So if we had known that 6 months or a year or 2 years down the road, we would, if it was a decision that we were to look back on and thought that wasn't the right decision, that may still happen, but we're not people who go down those roads. We both are like, okay, it wasn't the right decision, but we're not going down that road to live with, those what ifs and the fear and the remorse. Mm-hmm. It wasn't the right decision, but it's the decision we made at the time. Mm-hmm. And it was a decision that was right for us at the time. I think we're both those people that, we did what we thought was best at the time, so let's move on.
Yeah.
So we knew that was our mind, that's how we operate, and that's, I think, why we felt comfortable making that decision.
Yeah. Yeah. I hear you. And like we said, it's not an easy decision, but it is at some point sometimes to trust. We can only do our best. If there was a freaking book about how to make those super giant life decisions in the midst of going through a life-threatening illness, after getting married, in the middle of treatment, it's like, if someone has the perfect way to do this, please let one of us know so we can spread the news. Because no, it's not that obvious. And then you can kind of only do and take the path that makes the most sense. So you embark in the adoption exploration at that point, I guess.
Yeah. So we decided, okay, let's just give ourselves some time to, number one, process, what life with treatment means, and how, if it'll work, what the next 6 months even will look like for us. Because we certainly didn't want to get into anything if my health was deteriorating. We didn't feel like that was responsible. So we just gave ourselves some time. And then maybe about 6 months later, we started having conversations about, what would a family look like for us. And we knew we did want to have a child or possibly children. We weren't in a hurry. I mean, we're both relatively young. But we also knew that I couldn't conceive while on immunotherapy. And there's no, at that point, there was no end in sight. It was indefinite. And even now that I'm off immunotherapy, there's a chance that I may need to go on immunotherapy or a clinical trial in the future.
Yeah.
So we thought, chances are I may not be able to we may not be able to have a biological child.
Yeah.
So like I said, we had always had in our minds that adoption would be something we would consider. And so we started doing research on options. And
there wasn't many.
For someone who is in active treatment for cancer, you all but get hung up on when you start calling and emailing. So it's really it was all of that isolation all over again from my initial cancer diagnosis, because I just didn't know where to turn. And it was very comparable to before I found YACC, not knowing where to turn and knowing that someone else out there must be dealing with this, must have gone through this. I know people who have had a cancer diagnosis must have adopted. That's one of the most common reasons for fertility difficulties. So you can't tell me this doesn't happen.
Yeah.
But it was very difficult to get anyone to answer my questions or be willing to work with us. So we just kept looking until we found someone who said, actually, I've worked with individuals who have had cancer and helped them adopt. And funny enough, she had previously had cancer herself.
And was Newfoundlander.
It was a Newfoundlander.
No way. Okay.
So it was all about, for us anyway, it was about finding the right person who was willing to make a difficult, I guess, in what some people would call a difficult situation work. We didn't consider it a difficult situation because throughout treatment, I was working in an ICU as a social worker, and in an emergency department as a social worker. And Chris was like living his normal life. Like we were just doing our thing and happened to have this on the side.
It was treatment, she went every 3 weeks and for the actual treatment, and then went in for scans like once every quarter or whatever. But like, it doesn't alter your life. Those are just kind of regular appointments. So we didn't view our lives as any different. But obviously, when you're trying to adopt a child, they certainly do. And I think there was like, we investigated international adoption, and there was only 3 countries in the world that would allow someone actively in treatment to adopt. So it's also extremely expensive. We quickly found out. So then we looked, domestically, and fortunately we're in Ontario where private adoption is an option. And then when we found our social worker, or our case manager, I guess you call her, Betty Ann, who was willing to work with us and get the process started. Feels like a decade ago, because we actually started it pre-COVID and have been going, but very briefly started it. And so we've now been carrying it through these trying times that we live in right now. So that posed its unique challenges on its own, and kind of slowed down the process a little bit of getting our official certification as adopt-ready parents completed. So probably took from start to finish, that was about a year to get that done. And then once we had completed that process, that means we're able to register ourselves with all the different private adoption agencies that are in Ontario. So we've applied with a couple to this point, 2 or 3. So we're just registered with them, but realistically it's the waiting game. And we've had some very, very close calls, all, for example, 3 weeks away from a birth mother that we had an agreement with. 3 weeks before her due date, she, changed her mind and decided she wanted to keep the child herself. So, and, that's par for the course. Like, that's not the only one we had like that, that's all part of the adoption process and going through it. And, the first one, you're hurt. You're basically, I painted the nursery blue, and we were ready for this kid to arrive, and we bought strollers and clothes and all this stuff. And then, all of a sudden, at last minute, it's like, yeah, no, never mind. I'm just going to keep the baby, and it's obviously not as emotionally draining as a miscarriage would be. I imagine it's a similar experience, because we were ready to go. The car was getting fitted with the seat so you could take it home. Like we were, that was it. We had a baby in our heads, so
yeah. And I mean, adoption is, particularly private adoption, is very complicated because, we are coming from a place of privilege to be able to afford to go through this process. And then, this expectant mother, we're really happy. And it's very complicated because we're so happy that a child is able to stay with their biological family, which is the best place for a child. But then we're also grieving, what we felt was a loss. So it's really complicated, and it's a bit messy.
Yeah, and that's it, and that's part of the whole process, because I guess, like, again, like, you hit on a few things where I'm sure some people listening are thinking, well, for me, my treatment, or like, I know your treatment, whatever effect it had on you, kept you really functional, Nicole. And I know it's not the case for everyone. And again, it is impossible for us to have a situation in the conversation tonight that is fitting for everyone. But to me, a few of the things you're mentioning is one, that I think it is worth at least exploring our option, and even allowing some dreaming of possibilities and thinking about it and figuring those steps. And then also know that it's not a process without hurt and without, you put your heart at risk, and you really kind of, it's like, all right, I'm just going to wear this on my sleeve, walk around with, my heart in my hands, and be willing to be, the joy is going to be crazy huge. But also the moments where sadness and changes and decision changes in people's minds, that's part of the process you're in as well. So I think when we consider all those things, we can't know everything, but these are parts that is like, okay, that can also be part of it. It's not like all in the movies, right?
Yeah. I think it's, if this is something you're curious about, I think it's worth exploring and advocating for yourself, and keep looking until you find someone who says, I'm willing to help you try. Because, while I say that I lived a relatively normal, whatever that means, life, in terms of, being able to work and that sort of thing. On paper, I'm a mess. So, and that's what they look for. That's what they're looking at in terms of, are you appropriate to adopt? So it's not to say that it was without challenge. So it is absolutely worth looking into if it's something that you're curious about. I would also say that, just going back to, adoption is very messy. And just going into it with, knowing that it's not easy. And if you're curious about adoption, I would start by just learning a lot about adoption and the experience of the adoptee and the experience of the expectant and birth parents. Because if you're not in a headspace where you can go into open adoption and centering the adoptee and the expectant and birth parents' voice, then it's probably not the right avenue for you.
Yeah, I think that's it. And I guess, there comes a time where maybe you can get as much information as you can and try and wrap your head as much as you can around what this is and what it implicates. And then also, I think, listen to your inner voice and try and have moments where you can think rationally, because sometimes when our emotions solely lead the way, it's hard to actually be objective, of, is this the right time? Am I in the right space to sell? Even my capacity as a couple to adopt, and all of those elements come into play, I'm sure. Like, to your point, they look on paper. They don't go see Chris and Nicole when they're rocking it hard at work and kicking ass. And that's not necessarily what they see. They look what's written down, and that's different.
Yeah, I think point just on going through, trying to, I guess it for us, when we're going through the process, you learn a lot when you go through the home study, it's called, when you sit down with your caseworker and sit down and have these 8 sessions. A lot of the information and discussions that happen there, you're not getting on the internet anywhere, no matter what. And that was where we quantified our decision, because there was a few points and a few things that we learned along the way during that I was like, wow, are we really doing this for the right reasons? And does adoption really make sense for us? And I honestly, I think the only way you learn that is really starting the process and feeling it out, and that'll help with the decision. But it's an experience you can't really find anywhere online, I don't think, to really quantify and make sure you're doing the right thing and doing it for the right reasons.
Yeah, super good point, Chris. So now I guess you are in this waiting zone.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's like the most important job interview of your life almost. I don't even know how to explain it, but you literally, you submit our profile, which is basically a resume of how amazing and how great we are. And so the agency has those on file, and we obviously fill out a big, massive questionnaire about the type of child that we are looking for and the things that we are okay with in the birth mother's medical history, the things we aren't okay with. And so every time a potential birth mother comes, if your profile matches and they think you're a fit, then you get presented to the birth mother. And then the birth mother kind of goes through all the profiles that she's presented with, picks one, and then you start down the process of the adoption. And the problem is, like, you might be one of 3, 4, up to 10 profiles that get presented to each birth mother, and you always get a notification saying, okay, we're going to present you to this birth mother, we'll let you know. So it's just like, yeah, I don't know, the only comparison I can say is a job interview. Like, you get the first stage, you do the interview, and then the next stage is talking to the boss, and then making sure that the boss is the right fit. And it's really the best comparison I can give for somebody who hasn't gone through it out there. And then, yeah, if the birth mother makes the decision and chooses you, then you go ahead and start to finalize and start doing the legal portion of that. But at any moment, they can change their mind for whatever reason, and that's amazing that they've decided to keep that child. And they can actually also do that up to 21 days after the adoption is complete. So which is even when you have this baby, like we share our experience about, we were getting ready for the baby to come. You could physically have the baby, and then there is a 21-day legal period where you could potentially lose that child. So the whole process, I think the one piece of advice for sure is don't get too highs on the highs and don't get too lows on the lows. It's just, you've got to maintain consistency across the board, because things can change in any instance. And yeah, you're going to be, heartbroken when one doesn't come through, and you're also going to feel the joys of feeling, wow, we just got presented, or wow, she picked us, this is so exciting. You can't get too high on that. We kind of learned that the first time we got presented and kind of went down the road, and it didn't work out. And so after that first experience, because that one was pretty devastating, then you kind of, all right, just relax, and let's not get ahead of ourselves this time, and let's just let it all play out. So
it's hard to remember that it's not about you, it's about this child that's coming into the world. So it can be tricky to keep your emotions in check when it's easy to get excited, but we have to keep reminding ourselves that it's really not about us.
Yeah, so wise and loving and mature of both of you. I think it's great. And you've said a few things that reminded me of some conversations I've heard in our community that I think are really important to, if we want to bring this to a close, is ultimately, I think, yes, like you both said, you can find some information online, but as you make some decisions to move forward with adoption, if that is the path you're taking, or I would say with any family planning, eventually getting the help of a professional social work case worker, whatever it is in your case, can really help. Because I think some people struggle with some of the questions you said, like, what are my motivations for adopting? Should I be doing this if I have cancer? Like, all of those conversations we have. And sometimes these are really, really big, heavy things that I think you cannot always figure out by yourself. And sometimes you actually need to talk it through with someone who has had multiple conversation about that, to sort through some things, because otherwise you might actually say, well, maybe my motivations aren't right or whatever, so we won't do it. Where ultimately it is a risk always, right? To explore those things, it's always a risk that it's not going to work out the way we want, or it's going to take longer than we want. But I think ultimately getting some clarity and discovering what you want and what is going to make sense for you, regardless of where you are in your cancer journey and life, is really something that everybody can have access and should be allowed to have access to help figure it out.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I think one big thing that we learned, was if you're adopting a child to make you feel like you're doing something good, that is that is completely wrong mentality. And to me, I was like, well, yeah, I did kind of think that. Like, it was like, yeah, part of adopting is like, I'm going to feel good about myself. But you quickly learn as you go through the training and for obvious reasons, that, you can't be thinking about it like that. And it kind of put it into context of like, Nicole's had a rough journey, and consequently, I guess together, we've been through a lot. So, adopting a child, yeah, this is one way we're giving back and trying to feel good about ourselves. But when you go through the training, you learn very quickly that's not the right way to think about it. And at the end of the day, your entire responsibility is to give a child the best home possible. And if that's with you, then great. And so I, for me, and I don't know if Nicole felt the same way about that, but that was a big part of it for me. One sort of key learning that I took away from it. And you just get context around a lot of things, and you start to like think about, why am I really doing this, and making sure at the end of the day, it's for the right purpose.
Yeah, I think that goes back to your point of, if you are curious, or you're thinking about it, then maybe a first step is reaching out to someone who can start your home study. But maybe it's just having a one-on-one counseling session to say, I'm thinking about this, but I'm not sure what my motivation is. I want a child, but I don't know if this is the right path for me. Because you have to think about, what happens when that child is 15 or 18, and, how do you explain the decisions you've made? So it's not just a solution to infertility, I think, is one big thing that we want to stress. It's something that we're pursuing, but it's not a solution to our infertility.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I love, again, how this is important to say that kind of things, because I think there's shame almost sometimes in not knowing those things. Or, you know what, Chris, parts of me would have probably felt, because we hear that a lot.
Right.
We hear that a lot from a bunch of people who have adopted, who haven't, who had this initial kind of very pure, I think, intention of saying, I'm going to help. It's going to feel really good. And but to have first the honesty to say, well, those are some of the things I was thinking. And then to get in and be open to the growth, to the exploration, to what is required to kind of clarify, all right, okay. And I've heard you both since the beginning speak of this process, and I can hear how, I'm sure if we spoke about it 2 years ago, we would have had a very different conversation, where today it's kind of like the child is at the core and the center of all of this. And my heart wants this to work so much, because I think this child is going to choose beautifully if he ends up with the Dunnes. But yeah, it's something that I think is a process. I hope. Thank you so much for digging into this, and giving us like a little window, a door, bay window into your lives and this process. I hope that those watching, it's either brought curiosity for you, or maybe it's kind of reopened a door for you that you had closed completely. And again, the idea tonight is not to give false hope. I don't think either of you are in this with these, blinders and guarantees. It's just more, I think, to find hope and optimism. I know, Chris, you're a big believer in it's gonna work. It's gonna be all right. And I love that. But I do hope that the conversation we had tonight is gonna maybe have some people listening thinking, okay, or even maybe just having the conversation with your partner, the person in your life, and see how this makes sense, right?
And don't be afraid to reach out to others in the adoption community. I mean, we've had, can't even count how many Zooms just like this, where we ask people that have gone through the adoption experience, just asking them questions and having conversations to get a true insight, not necessarily the glorified version that you might find, on the internet, or even in talking with the agencies, just to get the true, honest perspective of what the process was like. And that could be anything from, asking questions about how much it is, or asking their experience, if, finding somebody who adopted an Aboriginal child, and get a feeling for how they handled it and what their experience was like. The community is extremely supportive, and Nicole kind of handles the speaking part and reaching out to people, but the two of us get on the calls, and I always found that extremely helpful, just getting the firsthand perspective on a number of things. So like I said, anybody out there that's watching, don't be afraid to reach out to us, or just join Facebook groups that are out there that, you know, are about adoption in your particular province, because the rules are all different, but people are extremely willing and open to talk about it. So
social media has been a big resource for us. Facebook groups, Instagram, particularly Instagram accounts of adoptees and expecting or birth parents. It's an invaluable resource. And then also we're both on social media, and we're happy to answer questions.
You're wicked awesome. We're going to put all that information, and I'll connect with you both after. So maybe as we, when the episode goes live, we can also include some resources for people to look into, because some people might not know where to start. Thank you again so much. Makes me happy to see you and makes me miss you even more. But I'm so grateful for the conversation we had tonight. Thank you a million times. I can't wait to see you again. And for anyone who's watched, hope it was good for you and interesting. Thank you for watching or listening, and hope you can join us next week, 7 p.m. And like I do every Monday, because our episodes air every Monday night, I remind everyone, myself included, to just breathe, to remember to just breathe when it's really good and when it's not that good. Just to kind of ground ourselves back in the present moment and just figure out what is happening the next second or the next 30 seconds or the next minute. Sometimes we are so caught up in what's going on that we kind of forget how helpful deep breaths, a few deep breaths can really help and get us some clarity. So little reminder there. Nicole, Chris, thank you. Have a great rest of the night. And everyone, good night and see you next week.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Bye.